welcome to the third installment of the Brazilian Constitution in a Nutshell. This is a short series of videos introducing people from other countries to our Constitution. My name is Nadia, I am a legal researcher, and I'm here with Professor Vanice Valle. She is a legal scholar, she has a postdoctorate degree on public administration and human rights. She is a permanent professor at Universidade Estácio de Sá, and she was a visiting fellow with Harvard Law School's Human Rights Program.
Hi.
On the two previous installments, we discussed a little bit of the historical process behind the Brazilian Constitution and how the Brazilian Constitution deals with human rights. On this installment, we're discussing constitutional amendments, is that correct?
Yeah, that's the matter, the subject.
Can you explain to us a little bit about the process of amendments in the Brazilian Constitution?
Yeah, surely. First of all, we should take into account the fact that the Brazilian Constitution is an analytical one. So we have something around 300 precepts in the Brazilian Constitution. And the original text has a lot of clauses regarding the constitutional amendment. So, constitutional amendment is possible. It has a special process which requires a supermajority in order to approve such intervention in the original constitutional texts. That supermajority will involve 3/5 of both houses in the legislative power and 2/3 vote. So it is somehow difficult to reach that majority. We should also take into account the fact that our presidency is qualified by the political scientists in Brazil as a coalition presidentialism, meaning that many times the president will will assemble a majority through the various political parties through a bargaining process. So despite the fact that it seems like a supermajority is not that difficult to reach, and the most significant evidence of this is the fact that we are reaching 100 constitutional amendments in almost 30 years of the Constitution from 1988.
That's a lot of changes in a very short period of time.
Yes.
But are there limitations as to what can be amended, or is it a free-for-all?
Now, we have the classical limitations considering time frame and exceptional circumstances. So if we're under a state of siege, it's not possible to amend the Constitution. In fact, this is happening right now because we have the military intervention in Rio de Janeiro state, so it's not possible to approve constitutional amendments at the moment. And we also have material limitations, the clauses that we call immutable clauses, establishing that it's not possible to amend precepts that regard with the federalist model, with a universal and free system of elections, and with the fundamental rights. So our Constitution establishes that you cannot approve amendments that have even a threat to those substantive values. So this is a very relevant limitation, and it's very frequent that those limitations emerge while discussing the possibility of some sort of constitutional amendment.
Okay, so if we have limitations such as the immutable clauses, I'd imagine that opens the amendment process to judicial review, is that correct?
Yes, in the Brazilian system, it's entirely possible to control the constitutionality of a constitutional amendment through judicial review. And in fact, it is very common. It happens all the time. And the Supreme Court, the Brazilian Supreme Court, sometimes will even pronounce the unconstitutionality of a constitutional amendment, and then the Parliament will approve another one in the same matter, and the Supreme Court will examine it again. So this is something that happens in our constitutional system, and it's a very sensible matter because it surely brings a lot of threats to stability and previsibility in the system. And you should also take into account the fact that control, the judicial review of constitutional amendments, is not submitted to any kind of time limitation or time frame. So you can have a constitutional amendment that has been enacted 5 or even 10 years ago, and it can be suddenly pronounced unconstitutional, and then you have a lot of consequences of that due to the pass of time.
Is it possible within the system for judicial review that the Supreme Court pronounces the unconstitutionality of a clause before it has been enacted, or does it have to have gone through the process, have been approved, be enacted, and then the Supreme Court can pronounce its unconstitutional?
No, we surely can prevent the enactment of a constitutional amendment that collides with that material limitation. So it is also frequent that members of the Parliament go to the Supreme Court wanting some sort of warrant, granting them the possibility to not be called to decide about a constitutional amendment that collides with those limitations. So this is something that really happens in the Brazilian system.
You mentioned earlier that we have around 100 amendments already in close to 30 years of Constitution. I mean, our Constitution was enacted on October 8, 1988, so in October we will turn 30. Yeah. Is there an explanation? Does the legal doctrine point out as to why we have been amending our Constitution so often?
Yeah, there are 2 major causes to that huge number of constitutional amendments. The first cause will be the fact that the model of the state, when you think about the state organization and the state relationship with the market and the economy, that model has changed through time. So you have a lot of constitutional amendments that were enacted around 1993, 1994, in which the framework of the relationship between the state and the market, the economy, was hugely changed. So the second explanation is a political one. Political scientists point the fact that usually people who are in office, who are holding and guiding the public policies, will try to turn permanent, turn definitive that kind of public policy, bringing those matters to the constitutional texts. So you have, for instance, one constitutional amendment that established a budgetary fund in order to finance education, and this is an example of turning into a constitutional clause something that is in fact a public policy. So the idea with that kind of strategy is to constrain the next power holders. So this is because they will have all to maintain the public policy held by the previous president, or they will have to pay a political price in order to approve a new constitutional amendment that will change that public policy. So it's an attempt to constrain future power owners. This is happening a lot in Brazil.
And that's very risky because you might have a power holder that includes a certain public policy regarding a certain human right into the Constitution, and then that public policy becomes protected by the immutability clause, and if it is later on surpassed by a new understanding of that human right or of how to protect and guarantee that human right, then you cannot change what is already into the Constitution, and you end up having a receding or backwards thinking constitution, which is not what we wanted when we said that human rights should be protected by the immutability clause.
Yeah, surely that strategy starts from a contradiction in terms. Public policy is supposed to be dynamic. It's supposed to be apt to have the capability to answer to current social problems. So bringing a public policy into the Constitution it's a denial of the pure nature of public policy. And it's not uncommon the fact that you have a public policy established in the Constitution that is not answering in a quite adequate manner to current problems. So you have a vicious circle because you have a constitutional amendment bringing up public policy into the Constitution. This will not answer anymore to the social needs, so you have another constitutional amendment in order to change it. So this is why we have almost 100 constitutional amendments.
Well, thank you, Professor, for that explanation of the Brazilian constitutional amendment processes and its particularities. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
I would like to invite you to watch the previous installments as well as the next one, which will be on the subject of...
We're going to be talking a little bit about the judicial review system in the Brazilian Constitution, which is quite different from the other ones that you may be used to. So don't forget to watch it.
We'll see you next time, and please don't forget to subscribe and click the little bell button so you get notifications of whenever we upload new material. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.